Hello, Leslie. Uh, oh, okay. Thank you.
Okay, again, section 504 versus IDEA for students with disabilities. I'm Mary Jane Williams. I'm Executive Director of Family to Family Network. And we'd like to thank Aetna Better Health of Texas for sponsoring all these trainings that we do. If you don't know about Family to Family Network and this is the first time you've attended a training, just know that we do a lot of case management information referral. We help with IEPs mostly through phone or email or for a fee. We have an annual conference coming up in January. We have an Autism 101 Academy coming up in March. We do a lot of training for families and we support you through your journey with your children. And then we have some events. And a lot of what we're going to talk about today, anything around special education, one of our websites that we developed with the Texas Education Agency about 15, 16 years ago was Texas Project First. So feel free to look at that website and use it as a resource. And as far as events, just wanted to let you all know about some events we've got coming up. We're doing a bingo night at Betsy's in Bel Air. The Holiday Lights Sensory Friendly Night, December 3rd. Tickets aren't available yet. I'd say by the end of the month, we should have a link and information on that. We've got a luncheon coming up on December 9th, and then our annual conference I talked about was in January, and registration for that will open in December. So a little bit about Section 504. It's from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, so it's been around for a long time. And then IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, which is 20 years ago, still quite some time ago. But there is a big difference between the two. Section 504 is basically a civil rights law, whereas IDEA relates to education. We're going to talk about all these things. Basically, the big thing about Section 504, it really covers any age, and then IDEA really just covers age 3 to 21, unless you're blind or have a visual impairment, and then you're sort of covered at a younger age. And then around funding, while we think that IDEA is federally funded, it's very limited in funding. It's not fully funded. So it really both come out of state and local funding. And we all know right now that our school districts are strapped for cash. And so, which means that services get cut too. But that's another conversation. So let's get started. So what's the purpose of the Section 504? It's really to prohibit discrimination against individuals with disabilities in places that receive federal funding. It covers people who have a physical or mental impairment that limit their one or more life activity. And those life activities can be caring for oneself, manual tasks, walking, seeing, hearing, speaking, breathing, reading, writing, calculating, math, concentrating, interacting with others, learning, and working. The definition of a student with a disability is broader than IDEA's definition, and it's not limited to those 13 categories that we see in IDEA. Oops, where to go? So the purpose for IDEA, of course, you all should know this, is to ensure that kids with disabilities have available to them a free, appropriate public education that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs. And prepare them for further education and employment or independent living. And for those of you that have kids at the transition age, you'll know that that's really college, career, military readiness, and that's all in your transition plan that you talk about those post-secondary goals for further education, employment, and independent living. I didn't ask here, and maybe y'all could just do a show of hands. You can use the reactions in the bottom. If you have a child that is under an IEP, if you want to just do a reaction or put your hand up, thumbs up if you've got a child with a disability that has an IEP. I only see one thumbs up. You guys see more? Okay, so then do you, if you've got a child that has a 504 plan, can you put your give a thumbs up in the reactions?
Don't see any.
So maybe some of you are sort of in between and you're not sure where we are, which is fine. That's what we're here for today. Oh, let's see, maybe there's in chat. IEP, looks like. So there's quite a few more of you with an IEP, so that's great. I just really wanted to know if we had people in here with 504 plans. So Section 504, you know, I talked about all these, but they really have those, that physical or mental impairment. They have a record of the impairment and they're regarded as having such an impairment. They also, there's some new additions to it, really talks about some other areas, such as if you have a cosmetic disfigurement or an anatomical loss that impacts your following body systems, psychological disorders, organic brain syndrome, emotional or mental illness, and learning disabilities. And they don't set forth a specific set of diseases, but anyway, it's all, again, related to limiting one or more life activities. And that's really important. Most of our kids that have IEPs also fall under Section 504. Section 504 is the big umbrella, and then IDEA is underneath. When kids go off to college, universities will be following Section 504 because IDEA doesn't follow them to university or college settings or post-secondary education. They're going to follow Section 504 rules. Everybody that has a disability doesn't necessarily, may not necessarily need an IEP. If you have a physical disability and you have no need for specialized instruction, maybe, I mean, you're taking regular ed classes, you don't need speech or OT or PT, you may just need specialized transportation or extra time or other accommodations to participate in general education. So you may just have a 504 plan for those. And then there are some hidden disabilities, and we just talked about those that also come under Section 504. Again, there's really no need for any specialized instruction. That's the big thing. When you're seeking eligibility for special education under IDEA, you've got to fall under these 13 disability categories. And so we all go our kids all go through that evaluation process to see which eligibility category they meet. And so if they meet one of these eligibility categories, they would be eligible for special education services, especially if they have a need for specialized instruction. As far as rights under Section 504, there are rights but they're not as extensive as what you have, thankfully, under IDEA. I mean, it still requires that you have, you have an identification, evaluation, and provision of services. Best practice is to notify the parents and have a plan, although the plan does not necessarily need to be written down, but that's just a good practice to have it written down. Also, there's a 504 committee that's really talks about people that are knowledgeable of the student, which of course should include you as a parent, but it's not necessarily required like it would be in IDEA. Parent consent is really not required for a kid to be evaluated or to receive a change of placement, but TEA is saying now that really when you evaluate for Section 504, you should really follow the same rules for evaluation that you do for an initial evaluation with under IDEA. So basically, you're going to follow that same evaluation process, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. And then school districts have a lot of flexibility with how they develop and carry out 504 policies and procedures. You've really got to sort of look at your school district procedures that are online, their board policies. The procedural safeguards aren't as stringent. And then every school district that has more than 15 employees, which basically is all the school districts in Texas, has to have a 504 coordinator. And when you get your student handbook at the beginning of the year, there should be the name and phone number and possibly email of your 504 coordinator in that booklet so that you know who that person is. And progress really doesn't have to be monitored as closely as it does under IDEA. Let's see. But then your rights under IDEA, same things regarding all the identification, evaluation, services. You've got procedural safeguards are more extensive. You have an ARD or IEP committee, which definitely includes the parent. You definitely have to give consent for evaluation or to have a change of placement. Oh, and I just copied this. It shouldn't say that they have. The school districts don't have flexibility in how they implement IDEA, sorry. We talked about procedural safeguards. You get a big booklet every time, once a year at least. I encourage you to review them. And then progress has to be monitored for your IEP goals and objectives, and whatever you've got in your IEP, that has to be monitored in the same way that everybody else gets grades. And you have all these procedural safeguards that are within your that booklet that you get every year. But the big one, of course, is prior written notice, where they have to give you notice if they want to make a change. It offers an opportunity for you. If they refuse to do something, you can ask them to put everything in writing. If they're going to do something that you don't like, you have to ask them to put it in writing. So you've got some sort of teeth behind IDEA, which you don't necessarily have within a 504 plan. Plus, you've got all these other rules around discipline and evaluation procedures. Oh, I just talked about that. If they've changed any of these, if they've got to do that prior written notice. Under 504, there really is, it's more of a notice of non-discrimination rather than the procedural safeguards notice. Supposed to implement the plans as written, and this is coming from straight from TEA's new guidebook that they put out this year. So I'm going to give you that resource at the end. It's really quite extensive and really helps you understand Section 504, but it's, as you can see, it's a little bit different than what you would find under IDEA. Again, I said this already, everybody's covered under 504 when you, all students with disabilities, but 504 plans don't require special ed or related services. Basically, it's going to provide accommodation or auxiliary aids or supplementary aids and services. You're not going to have any IEP where you're going to have goals and objectives and that sort of thing. I know for many families, we get a little bit confused about what an accommodation versus a modification is. And accommodations are going to come under a Section 504 plan. If you think about the letter A, oops, I can't see myself there, sort of with your fingers an A and you turn it upside down, you've sort of got an H. It's really how your child accesses curriculum, how they access the building, how they access testing. That's an accommodation that's made. And there's really no reduction in the level of learning or what they are required to master. They're going to master the same thing as everyone else. For modifications, if you do an M with your fingers and turn it upside down, that really talks about what your child learns and how they, and whether the mastery level is reduced. So really they're reducing the level of learning, and that's when you usually have an IEP goal or objective that reduces the level of learning. So some examples, maybe you might need extra time. Maybe you have cancer and you're doing chemotherapy. You might need some time for rest and recuperation, or for any other medical need. You might need time for counseling or therapy, not in the sense if you participated in those and then you need some rest. You might need modified test arrangements, oral testing, or different formats. Just a different format. It's not reducing the level of learning. A note taker or a tape recorder, special parking space. You know, we see those in our community. You know, we've got special parking places for people who might have a physical disability. You might need extra time between classes. Again, maybe a modified PE program so that it's less exertion for a person. Do you have any other ideas out there? Any thoughts of accommodations that you can think about? I thought it was very interesting because I know that a lot of teachers have this misguided idea that the student has to ask for the accommodation. And actually, TEA in page 26 of their new guide, it states accommodations should be unique and written in such a way that teachers are able to implement them with fidelity. Do not use phrases such as at student request for accommodations. And I think that's really important because for so many years, I think they write a 504 plan and then they expect the student to be able to follow that plan and request that accommodation if they're not getting it within the classroom. So it's really about the teachers implementing that plan versus the students having to do that. Now, when students go off to college, students do have to be able to implement that plan and ask for accommodations. And it's probably a good thing for your junior or high school senior to build those self-advocacy skills and start requesting those accommodations. But again, I thought it was very interesting that in TEA's new 504 guide, they talk about this specifically, that it's teachers should be implementing these accommodations for kids. If your child needs more assistance than just accommodations or all those auxiliary aids or services, of course, then we're going to request that FIE, which TEA says really is best practice for any kid with a disability, and then develop an IEP. The timeline, of course, is you request the evaluation in writing, the school gets your consent, they do the evaluation, and then have an IEP meeting. In Texas, they have 15 days after you request an evaluation to get that consent, and then they have 45 school days after you sign consent for the evaluation to complete the evaluation. That's subject to get various other conditions if your kid's not at school, etc. And then once the evaluation is complete, they have 30 days to have the IEP meeting. We haven't had any questions yet, have we? Because I can't see anything in chat, so.
Somebody raised their hand, Mary Jane.
Yes.
Okay, I
Stephanie.
can't see everybody on my screen either. Who was
Stephanie. Mhm.
that?
It was me. I had a question about the accommodations. If the student and the class or the grade goes somewhere, do those accommodations follow them like for a field trip?
I would assume so. I mean, because the school is receiving funding to go on that field trip.
Just wondering. Thank you.
You're welcome. And I didn't look closely at the TEI guide. I wonder if that's addressed in there. I'll have to pull it up and check for you. If we're following that same process, they're going to review the evaluation. Either the child is eligible because they meet the definition, one of the 13 definitions, and they require some specialized instruction, or the child is not eligible. And then we're going to develop a 504 plan or do response to intervention services, or you can just disagree with the evaluation. That's always a right that you have. Just so you know, some of the response to intervention levels of support, response to intervention is a little bit loosey-goosey, but I know sometimes you're going to hear that conversation. Really, there's different tiers of interventions, and really, if you're getting up into tier 3 interventions, that's mostly going to be using an IEP, where there's specific students that are being provided with some intervention. Response to intervention usually is sort of that tier 1 and tier 2 group interventions. Just so you know a little bit about that. Often you'll hear that, oh, we're going to do some response to intervention. If they say that, ask them what they're going to be doing. What interventions are they going to provide? Are they going to provide you with some feedback or progress on those interventions? Technically, I think there just has to be minimal progress with those interventions. So it's important for you as parents to ask questions. Family to Family talks about all that all the time. Ask questions, ask questions, ask questions, especially if you don't understand something. As far as dispute resolution, doing pretty well. There's different dispute resolution processes under Section 504. Really, just like any other dispute that you have, you probably should start with the least formal. I guess it's still formal, but talk to your principal or your teachers. You have the ability under 504 to review records. So you can go and review any records that you have to do with the 504 plan, progress, etc. You can request a hearing. And then you're going to have to look at the procedures within your school board policies on how you file a grievance with the school district 504 coordinator. Or you can file a complaint with the Office of Civil Rights. Again, remember, Section 504 is discrimination. That's the basis, really, you know, they've discriminated against your son or daughter. There there's an email for the Office of Civil Rights in Dallas, or there's a phone number that you can call and probably ask questions before you file a formal complaint. But then there is an online OCR, the Office for Civil Rights Discrimination Complaint Form that you can use. And I'm sure this one goes to the federal government, and then it probably gets farmed back to the Dallas office to look at and follow up with you. IDEA, we've got quite a few other ways to solve a dispute. Of course, you can talk to your principal and teachers. You can have an ARD or IEP committee meeting, but then, as you probably all have heard Leslie talk about, take the next step. File a complaint, request mediation, or have a due process hearing. Complaints and mediation are really good, easy ways, free ways for you to resolve some issues. You all know that you can disagree with the IEP at the IEP meeting, and it's important that when you disagree and you've got that opportunity to resolve issues within that 10-day or whatever the committee decides when they're going to come back to talk about the dispute, take time to meet with your school and figure out if you can solve the problem or the issue in those 10 days, and you can come back to agreement. But again, if you get to the end of the second meeting after you've disagreed, that school can implement that IEP unless you do something else. File that complaint, request mediation. If you want mediation, you probably should request that the first time that you disagree, not the second time, just because you can get the mediator to facilitate that second meeting. Or especially if you want a state mediator, you've got to do it within a couple days of that first disagreement for a state mediator to come in and participate. So anyway, just know that you've got a lot more options for dispute resolution under IDEA than you do under Section 504. Again, as I said, disagreeing with the evaluation is the key thing you have right from the start. If you don't agree with the eligibility determination, if you don't agree with what they're thinking about, I mean, it's an option, and you can request that independent educational evaluation. So what do you do if your child has an IEP and the school suggests a change to a 504 plan? Any ideas from people? You can type in the chat, or you can. What do you think you should do if your child has an IEP and the school suggests a change to a 504 plan? You can unmute yourself if you want.
There's one comment in the chat that says call an ARD meeting.
Yes, that would be a first start. But what if you're in the IEP meeting and they say, we don't think your child needs an IEP anymore and we need a 504. We're going to change to a 504 plan.
I don't have to accept it. I can tell them no, and I can have another eval if I need it done.
I can't hear that person, whoever it was.
I'm sorry. My name is Travis. I said I don't have to agree with it. I can request another eval if needed. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you really well.
Yeah,
Can somebody else hear her?
No,
I heard her. She said
Oh.
you can request a new evaluation.
Correct.
I think that's what she said.
Correct. That's what you need to do, is say, I need a new evaluation. Then they have to determine eligibility again. And then if their eligibility still says your child meets the eligibility and still needs services, which is the tricky one, because that's where they're going to try to say that your child doesn't need services. But then you can, what do you do next? If they do that evaluation and still say you need a 504 plan, what's the next step?
Do my own eval. Have my own personal eval.
Well, it's not your own personal evaluation. You're going to ask for an independent educational evaluation. So yes, so that's right. I mean, I really wanted to make sure you all started to think about these questions or this process, because I am a little bit concerned with school districts who don't have money and they don't have special educators, and they're pushing a lot of kids into regular ed, which is a great thing. I'm glad they're in regular education, but I don't want them to be missing out on services if they really need services. And again, family, it's all about needs, and you've got to be able to describe those needs. It's not that your child needs speech therapy. Your child needs speech therapy because they can't pronounce any words correctly, or they can't communicate with others. It's not, you've got to be able to describe the educational need. And I know families, that's a hard thing sometimes, but it's really important for you to be able to do that. And use those old evaluations, get them out and look at the needs in there. I'm sure you've seen them. So just some resources, as I said, TEA put out this technical assistance on section 504. It's rather detailed. It has a lot of great information, especially if you are on a 504 plan and you want to understand a little bit more. They talk about certain disabilities that might have a health plan or an emergency plan of care really requiring a 504 plan. Just so you know, if your child has a health plan, you probably should have a 504 plan as well. But there's just a lot of good information in there. As I said, that page 26 where I saw that they're really telling schools that it shouldn't be at student request. I mean, that's a good thing you can point to. And the other part of it in there, it really talks about doing just a regular evaluation like you do, and following the timeline like you do for an initial evaluation for kids with disabilities anyway, just to follow all that same rules. And so that will help.
And
And
Mary
then,
Jane, oh, I'm sorry to interrupt. There's a question from
okay.
Linetti. Go ahead, Linetti, if you want to.
Yes, I had a quick question. When she was doing like the Q&A asking about what's the next steps, what would you recommend if the school is aware that your child has, I guess, certain diagnoses, and they just flat out refuse to provide services because I guess the IEP or you haven't come to ARD in a timely manner?
What do you mean you haven't come to ARD in a timely manner?
So there was just a lot of things. I don't want to spend a lot of time going
Yeah.
into like the details, but there was just a lot of extenuating circumstances in my case. And so I made the request using the template. I can't remember if it was from IDA or they have a template where you can request an emergency ARD. And for whatever reason, they went ignored. And so that caused I guess the IEP, because it has a date. I think it's like every 2 or 3 years or something like that. You have to go to ARD and, discuss. Well, that didn't happen. And so at this point, my child has been removed from his special education setting without all the things that you discussed, and he's in general ed with no supports. Like the school has flat out sent emails saying that they're not going to offer it.
As long as they have emails and they put something in writing, and if you requested and you did it in writing was that for an evaluation or was it for the IEP, an emergency IEP meeting?
It was for an emergency IEP meeting, and part of it was for evaluations because whatever was originally implemented wasn't successful. Like there was no whatever goals that they had, I didn't see any progress. For example, my son is in the 4th grade, but he's still on the level of a kindergartner / first grader.
And how is he gonna be able to catch up in the regular ed classroom?
That's
Did they- Well,
my big question.
and if they came right out and said, are they just implementing his old IEP?
They're not implementing anything. They said, so what the email said was the IEP expired, and so therefore they're not offering any special education services or accommodations until a new one is held. A new ARD meeting is held. Is what the email said.
I would probably reach out to SpedTex or TEA or file a complaint with TEA, because that doesn't sound right to me. If you have an IEP and it expired, but it was not due to any fault of the child, I would think you would still want to be able to provide them with the supports that they required.
Right.
That sounds like just a way to get out of providing any services because they don't have any teachers.
I agree. Okay.
Yeah, I would be following a complaint, and since you have some written documentation,
Mhm.
that would probably be a good thing to share.
Yes, ma'am.
And and the fact that you actually sent in a written request for an emergency IEP meeting, and it doesn't have to do with discipline, does it?
No,
No. Okay,
ma'am.
that's good.
He was in an adaptive behavior class, but it was more of, like I said, the education, because he's a 4th grader and he's reading, writing. His understanding is still on the kindergarten 1st grade level, which
Yeah.
translates to me that what they were offering was not effective.
Yeah, well, maybe we can have somebody follow up with you after the meeting. If you haven't talked to anyone before. But anyway, yeah, I would say the best thing for you to do would probably to file a complaint if they're not, they didn't, and you have all the documentation, and then let it run through that process. The big thing about filing a complaint though is you've got to have a solution, to have that emergency ARD meeting for your son. You might want to have them TEA see how many other kids they've dismissed from special education, because technically, I guess if he doesn't have an IEP, it was a dismissal and they didn't do an evaluation to dismiss him. That's just my thought off the top of my head without really thinking too much about it. So,
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'm writing all your feedback down.
and I'm sure if you spend any time with Leslie or Judy, they probably told you the same thing, but that would be the best thing, I would think. If there's any other questions, because I think we're at that point.
There's one more question in
Okay.
the chat, just popped up now. It says, sorry if I missed this. So we can have an IEP and a 504. My child has a diagnosis of autism, but also has severe food allergies and eczema. Can I request a 504 for her medical needs?
Well, since they already have an IEP, you don't need a 504 plan. You're probably going to need a health plan, though. What I was really talking about when I said that was the fact that if there's some kids that just have allergies, or there's maybe they have seizures and they just need a health plan to cover that, or that maybe they have cancer and they need a health plan. They really should have a 504 plan. But if you have an IEP, you should be able to address some of the same things within your IEP. You don't need to have a separate 504 plan. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Okay. Thank you. She does have a health plan at school. That's what she's writing.
Yeah.
I don't see any other questions on the chat, maybe, Leslie?
What I was gonna say about that, Mary Jane, maybe tell me if I'm right or wrong, but if you have an IEP, sometimes if there's a problem, it might be more appropriate to file an OCR complaint instead of a TEA complaint. There's a big difference between those. Can you maybe talk about that a little bit, Mary Jane?
Okay, I'll try. Again, Office of Civil Rights really talks about discrimination, and it's discrimination because your child has a disability. So you have to think about if it's discrimination or it's just not implementing an IEP. If it's an implementation or a lack of an evaluation, or the evaluation, they dismissed your kid without an evaluation, you're better off filing the complaint with TEA. But if it's outright discrimination, which, I mean, there are some school districts that may have done this, you'd really need to go through the Office of Civil Rights, whether you have a child which has an IEP or a child with a 504 plan. If they're not providing accommodations that are in your IEP, you could file an Office of Civil Rights complaint because it's discrimination. But you also could go that route of going through TEA for lack of implementation, but you'd probably have a little bit more luck with accommodations and the access part of it if you're going through Office of Civil Rights. Your thoughts, Leslie?
Yeah, that's good, Mary Jane. I was going to think of an example, like, for example, let's say your child uses a wheelchair and they want to be in theater or arts, but there's no ramp to get up on the stage. That even if your child only has an IEP, you could still file an OCR complaint because they're denied access to something that everybody else is denied to. So that's just one example.
Yeah. Thanks. I didn't realize you wanted me to give an example.
No,
Okay.
it just came to my head.
Deirdre, you have a question?
Yes, I just have a quick question. So I have one of my children who's receiving IEP art services primarily for his visual impairment.
Uh-huh.
He also had some new diagnoses, during the time he basically has an ADHD and some other diagnoses. And we brought that to the school's attention, and they've also been providing additional services, accommodations for him. However, they discovered that he has, handwriting issues, which they classify as dysgraphia now. And we've had this for many years, and the services and the accommodations that they've put in place have not really been effective. And I've inquired about this several times. What are we doing? He's not making progress with this area. And I feel as if they just kind of blow me off or don't really address the issue. And they've said, okay, at the progress meeting, we'll talk about it. But every time I have done this, and I am kind of like at the frustration point where I don't know what else to do, because the teacher can't really address it because she's not the one that's providing the services. It's the outside person. She's like some kind of learning specialist who's doing it. And when I try to communicate through or to her, it's like she gives me absolutely no feedback. So I am just wondering, I have an IEP meeting coming up next month, and I'm just trying to figure out how to carefully address this, because it's been over a year and a half since they put these accommodations in place, and I have really seen no progress. And my son honestly feels like it's a waste of time for him. He feels like he's not learning. It's taking him away from class time because he's missing class time from going to this thing, and he feels like it's no benefit to him.
So that's not necessarily an accommodation. That would be some sort of specialized instruction.
Yes, I guess for dysgraphia. But if he's not making any progress with meeting those goals, and it's not effective for him, how do I address the issue with the school in his next ARG meeting? Because I feel they're not communicating with me. Number one, they only do progress assessments once a year, which I've already talked to the principal about, which is not sufficient. And number two, he's being taken away from classroom instruction, which he feels is more valuable to him than going to this service that is not really helping him. And we've done so many interventions outside of school, but dysgraphia is an issue that we just kind of, where we're really having a struggle trying to get around it. And it's affecting the way he presents his work. He's missing a lot of points because if they can't read what he's writing, he's not going to get credit for it. So it's it's obviously an issue that we're trying to address, but we're really, kind of at a standstill with it. We don't know how to, go further.
And they don't use assistive technology?
With him, they do for some things, but there's a lot of things that he's still in 4th grade, so they do have to do a lot of handwriting. So, but he just honestly feels like he wants to stop it. And I have found no value or no benefit for him doing it because he feels like I've just seen the work and it has not, his handwriting and, his progress with that has not improved.
How old is he?
He's 10, almost 11.
So he's going into junior high. So, personally, I would probably have him come to the meeting and express his thoughts and feelings about it.
That's true. Yeah, I could have him for part of it.
And he doesn't have to stay for the whole meeting, but
for
have
the
him come at the
accommodations part.
beginning and just say, I'm not seeing any benefit from this because I think it will have a lot more impact coming from him than from you.
Yeah, that's true. And I do have with my other kids, I have had them start with my oldest son, he's attending his IEP meetings now. So I think maybe this son is ready to kind of be a part of
Well,
that
and you can just
conversation
tell him
too.
about this part of it and how I think that's valid that he's missing instruction on other things and so
He feels lost when he gets back and
yeah.
lost. And so I think, yeah, it's something that we'll address, but I just feel like the school has not really, they've sent a letter at the beginning of the year saying that they're implementing a service, but then there's absolutely no progress reports throughout it for the whole year, which is my frustration.
And is the service written into your IEP?
You know what? I have to check thoroughly because this dysgraphia service kind of came in, I think, after his ARD last year. So it was like an amendment to the IEP. So I believe that we kind of have to go back in there and make sure that it is part of his goals and his things, if that's something that he wants.
Well, and even if it was an amendment to the IEP, it should be related to some sort of goal, which has to document progress.
Yeah,
In the same fashion that you get regular grades, whether that's 6 weeks, 9 weeks, or whatever.
And he's also in math intervention, which I have inquired about progress report, and I just have the school where we're in. I am getting communication is a big issue for them, and for me, I communicate very clearly, and I go to the principal if I have an issue. But it seems as if their communication with especially, the service providers is very limited. And so I'm just trying to work around it and trying to be as, just nice as I can about it, because I want them to make sure they understand that, yes, some things are not working and that we have to put in place different things if that intervention is not working.
Yeah.
And if he can show what he knows and can, make good grades using assistive technology, why does he have to do handwriting at all if it's not something that he's ever going to be able to do? And then also as adults, I hardly ever use handwriting anymore. Everything's on the computer.
That's true. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's something that he's been made to feel bad about it for many years. And I think that they've taken off a lot of points. A lot of his grades have been altered because of the handwriting issue. So I think when at the next meeting, I'm going to make that a point that he needs to be able to, have more opportunities for him to be able to put his work in writing rather than having to be, graded poorly because they can't read his handwriting.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, guys.
And technically, due to his vision disability, he probably would be eligible to have a note taker or somebody to transcribe his words for him and write them down if they need it in handwriting.
Probably at middle school, that probably will be a necessary accommodation.
No, it won't be, but yeah, they should have had that. I mean, I know fourth grade ELA writing essays and stuff, it just doesn't matter. I mean, my son went to computer technology for everything writing in third grade, so just in preparation for all that testing. So anyway, I'd say for the rest of the school year, especially if your IEP meeting is coming up, that he shouldn't have to use handwriting, especially if whatever they're pulling him out to work on dysgraphia isn't working. So anyway.
Thank you, Mary Jane. There's one other question here. It says, my child has an IEP that offers speech therapy, but she didn't receive any the first 9 weeks of school. They are offering her compensatory speech therapy on Saturdays. Can they do that? Can they offer these services outside of regular school hours?
Yeah, they can.
Mhm.
You have to agree to that. Are they going to pay the transportation? Are they going to transport her to that service?
They would have to offer a complete thing. And she's saying that no, they're not offering any of that.
Go ahead, Leslie. I know you want to say.
So this happened, something similar happened several years ago in HISD. A parent, the child needed speech therapy. It was in the IEP, and they didn't have a speech therapist, so they wanted to just offer compensatory services in the summer. And so the parent filed a complaint, and her remedy to her complaint of her child not receiving needed speech therapy was for the school to pay for private speech therapy and pay for mileage to and from private speech therapy. And TEA did grant that because that is really not appropriate. If the school can't provide something, guess what? They need to pay for it. So, yeah, doesn't sound appropriate to me. I mean, families do things on the weekend, I wouldn't go for that.
Yeah, I wouldn't go for it either. It's up to you as a parent, but yeah, I would be filing a complaint if they didn't provide the services, because not only did they not provide it for your child, they probably didn't provide it for any other child in the building. So, I mean, it's already a systemic thing. So, and you could ask TEA to check if the services were provided to the rest of the kids. I know they had to do that when I filed a complaint. They had to check the whole district. So that's the benefit of filing a complaint, is sometimes school districts, it ends up being a lot of work for them to prove that they've actually provided that service to everybody and not just left your child out. So.
And another thing about filing a complaint or mediation or due process, you have to remember that a lot of times it doesn't go all the way through, because TEA, when you file any of those three things, they ask the school, go have another resolution meeting. And at that point, the school knows you're serious and they know you know how to file these things. And so lots of things get resolved in that resolution meeting and they never even go through. So don't be afraid, be nice, but be assertive.
So Christina put it in the chat. We really need you to fill out our evaluation. Edna really wants us to make sure that we're completing those evaluations. It helps us for our grants and any future grants. The other thing I want to say too is you probably will get an email from us regarding we're trying to be a great nonprofit for GuideStar, and they're sort of the tax people, and we really need 10 reviews. So if you wouldn't mind submitting a review on great nonprofits, we'd love that. I just need 10 of them, and I think I only have 2 at this point. So feel free to do that. But yes, complete the evaluation. Are there any other questions? I know there were a couple people that were just coming up on the hour.
Yeah, we do not have any on the chat.
I
And
hope this was
it's,
beneficial. Is there anything you all can say that you definitely learned out of this?
Mhm.
Anything specific that you learned? Oops, sorry. Oops. Want to get that back there.
Yeah. Hi, my name is Ryan.
Hey, Brian.
Um, so a takeaway is with regards to the with the parent who says he's been downgraded because of his handwriting. And I actually realized that it does make sense because everything is, basically being done with AI. So instead of having to fuss about him, he's in third grade now. Um, he can write minimally, but instead of having to fuss and make that an issue, um, I I would think switching over or um encompassing the technological trend, which is making everybody go AI. I think that might be better because and funny, I was at his school for his ARD meeting, and I happened to get to see him during computer, and I was blown away because obviously I was doing less than he could do. So what we use in the house are laptops, and he has issues with using a mouse, so we have to get an external mouse. And he was using a desktop, and he was very dexterous. I mean, every other person in his class was like on 10%. He had already finished. And I told myself, well, okay, so that means whenever Lolo provides money, I'm just gonna get him a desktop computer because apparently that's where he seems to really thrive. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that I did with my son early on is his writing. I mean, he used to write and his letters were about, 5 inches tall. And I started really young with him using a keyboard and technology so that by the time we got to third grade, even though it was a hunt and peck, well, not really, because now he still does that, but he's very quick and technology has really helped him over his school career because he was able to access the curriculum a little bit better and provide responses. So yeah, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Is there anything else anyone learned that was a big aha moment?
Just one last question here in the chat is, do you have a reference that explains what all these acronyms stand for, like IDEA and ART and all others you have talked about?
Yes, I think that was one of our early trainings, but IDEA stands for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and ART is that term is only used here in Texas. Admission review and dismissal, or your IEP meeting or individualized education program meeting.
Also, SpedTex has a quick reference guide for all the acronyms.
And Texas Project First has it as well.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And it's good to know them.
Yeah.
All right, that's all we have, and it's 1:03, so we did.
Yeah,
really
reach
good.
out if you can't find that.
Yes, please.
Also,
And-
where do you find the claim forms?
The what?
The claim forms to be able to file the claim. Where do you find that?
The complaint forms?
Yes.
You know what? If you send an email, somebody can send you a link to those. They're on the Texas Education Agency website. Even if you put in TEA complaint into Google, I bet you it'll pop up.
Okay, thank you.
But always email us if you have any questions and can't find something.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody. We've really appreciated, and I'm going to stop. Can you stop the recording?
Sure.
And y'all have a great day.